first what is a class, because I think as far as I know, as far as I remember, we have not discussed the idea of a class yet. So you are already familiar with basic C programming, where you would have seen what is a struct, and you would have also seen what are functions. Now, the idea of a class, which probably will be dealt more rigorously in your C++ course, here I am just going to give you a basic introduction to a class, not a very elaborate introduction. So we have the idea of a structure in C, which actually contains data. So we say, for example, struct employee, and we write the data associated with an employee. So we say int, age, float, salary, and maybe char, name. So this is what we would do to represent just a data structure employee. Then we would have a bunch of functions associated with that employee. For example, the functions which could be associated is create an employee, which would basically fill up this data structure. It would take an EPTR as a pointer and fill it up. Then there would be something called give increment, and then that would take the salary and increment the salary. Then it would say change age. That would be another function which would do something to the age. So essentially we have a pool of functions which basically work on this data structure and do whatever is required for that data structure. So in our parlance, we call the data as the state. This is called the idea of a state, and this is called the idea of functions, and also in Python. So we have the idea of an object-oriented class, or the idea of a class in an object-oriented language, where we bring state and behavior together. One entity which encapsulates both state as well as behavior, and that essentially is the idea of a class. So a one-line definition of what is a class is a combination of state and behavior. You put it together, you get a class, as simple as that. Now the other question which needs to be addressed is that why would you want to show you why you need to bring state and behavior together? Some of the reasons are because we have to model what are called real world entities. For example, let's take the next page. Let's say we want to model a car. Now all of you will agree that car is a real world entity. Now car cannot be described by just its state or by just its behavior. We need both state as well as behavior to describe a car. It cannot be without that. Why? Because if you say a car has, what make of the car it is. What is the make of the car? Is it a Santro, or is it a Mercedes, or is it a Hindustan Motors? Is it a Maruti Suzuki? What kind of make this car belongs to? Which is the year in which the car was made or purchased or whatever? Which year does the car belong? So, which would also say how old is the car. Then is it an automatic car, or is it a stick shift car? Is it a stick based car, or is it an automatic car? So that would be what we call the state of a car. And what would be the behavior of a car? Driving a car, okay, or stopping a car, or pushing a car, or even crashing a car. These are all different behaviors you associate with a car. And what is argued is that in object-oriented programming, we need to capture not just the state of an entity, but we also need to capture the behavior of an entity. And the class gives us a very neat and simple idea of putting them together. That is why we talk about class. And this is a very common thing which is now today there in all object-oriented languages. In fact, the essence of an object-oriented language is how well do you allow the programmer to define a class. So that is what we say is the essence of an object-oriented language. Now, what has happened today is that, we have object orientation, and on top of that we have a bit of functional programming. So the current word is we are going beyond object-oriented programming into what is called functional programming. Now we'll do a lot of that when we do Python and all of that, but we'll not talk about it so much here. Okay. So now let us go to the idea of R course, or what is necessary in R course to understand. So what we are going to talk about is in our data structures course, what do we need? Okay. What kind of objects are we going to create? What kind of data structure classes are we going to need? Okay. Now I am going to start with the definition of a linked list. I am going to say what is a linked list, and then we are going to create some stuff in a linked list, and then we will ask you to create some and see how you are able to do or not. So I think many of you or all of you know what is a linked list, correct? Am I right? Wrong? Wrong? Okay. Okay, let's not pretend that you know anything about a linked list. Okay. Well, what is a linked list? A simple idea of a linked list is, first of all, there are two words here, list and linked. So in linked list, we create a data structure which is like this. Just visualize this in memory. This is a linked list. Now these are called nodes of the linked list. Now node, the nature of a node can vary depending on what are you creating in that linked list. Is it a linked list of employees? Then each node is going to be an employee. Is it a linked list of students? Then each node is going to be a linked list of, each node is going to represent a student class or student object. We'll come to that. So each of these nodes, okay, each is called a node, and each node is connected to another node and so on, except that the last node is not connected to anyone. That is, it's terminated in a null. And each linked list has a head. So this is called the head, which is like the first node in a linked list. So in order to identify a linked list, you just need a head, and that's it. Because once you have a head, you can traverse. This is called traversing. Traverse through the linked list from this node to this node to this node. And how do you do programmatically? We are going to talk about it today. So you start with the head, go to this node, go to this node, go to this node, go to this node, and then you go on going till you hit a null. This is the end of the road, like the end of the map. Now let's visualize how will you create a linked list of, let's say, employees. Let's just define how we will go about doing it. Okay, so each one of them is a node, and as I said, node can vary depending on the kind of problem that you are trying to solve. So I have, let's say, class, let's take class student. So what does class student represent? Now class student will represent at a very basic level each student or each node in a linked list of students. So every node will be an object of this class. I'll come to that object in a moment. And I will also talk about what is the difference between an object and a class. I think that will be very easy to understand. So let's not make the student very complicated. Let's say for a student there are only two fields, int age of the student and say int roll number of the student. Okay, this is what the student represents. This I will say is the state of the student, or some people also use the word data of the student. Okay, so you can say data of the student. Now, those of you who are connected to, is everybody connected to telescope? Yes, no? Please get connected to telescope, then I'll open a practice question for you so that you can, I don't know, is the username, password given? No? Or it may be pretty standard. It's given? Okay, please, I'll wait for a couple of minutes. Please see if you can connect to telescope with the appropriate username, password, because soon I would like you to start typing along with me. If we are creating class student, just say class. By convention, the name of a class is always uppercase, meaning it starts with uppercase. So this S is always, not always, but generally it's considered good habit to make that as uppercase. It's not mandatory. The language doesn't mandate it. Class, of course, is in lowercase, and the rest of student is also in lowercase. So I have int age, int roll number. Now, generally, every class has a special function or a special method which we call as a constructor. So the job of a constructor is to initialize the state to some sensible value. Otherwise, it will have all nonsense. It will have 0 and 0. We don't want that. So normally, anybody who creates a class also creates a constructor for that class. How do I create a constructor? Well, I can create a constructor inside or outside like any other method. I will, for the time being, construct it inside. So how do I identify the constructor? It has the same name. It is like a function. Has the same name as the name of the class. Whatever the name I give there, the same name I use here. It doesn't have a return type. Now, this is very important. It doesn't have a return type means not even void. You can't say void there. A lot of people understand no return means void. No. A constructor is identified by this characteristic that it should not have a return type. So if I put void there, this does not become a constructor because void is also treated as kind of a return type which returns nothing. No, there should be no return type. It should not be there at all. So this is the constructor. Same name as the name of the class. And then you can have parameters. So I'll choose one parameter as A. I'll call it as A. Another parameter I'll call it as student. Int A, int R. These are my two parameters of my constructor. Then I open a curly bracket where I write the body. Nowadays, as you will, when we move on to other programming languages like JavaScript and all that, this kind of parameter declaration is going out of fashion. This is very quickly getting replaced by a lambda expression. And so even while I was writing this, I was a little uncomfortable because I am also doing a lot more of the JavaScript based programming or the more lambda style of programming. So given this is our old style of declaring parameters, what are we saying? These, as you know, in C are formal parameters. We are saying A and R, it needs two parameters in the constructor, and we'll use it to initialize our state. So I'll say age is equal to A and roll number is equal to R. This is my constructor. So I have one constructor. I can have more than one constructor also. And normally I would say this is public. So I would say public colon, and whatever follows here are public methods. So unless I put this public, the constructor won't become public. Okay. So public colon. Okay. I hope. Okay. Let me write it again. Colon. This indicates that whatever follows from here is public. Okay. I'll have public, and let me just write one more method in this constructor, which is to display the student if you require a display, whatever the age of the student or whatever. So let's try and write a display method. So I'll write display. Now display doesn't take any parameters, okay, because it will just display whatever is age and whatever is roll number. So how will I write a display method? I'll write cout and age and then I will write some space, and then I will say roll number, okay, and then I will say NL. Okay, I will explain this in a moment. This is NL. You will have to pardon my handwriting. So semicolon. This is a semicolon. So this is display, and this ends my class. Okay. Now let me elaborate a little, because some of you may not be very certain with this. So this is a method. This is a method. This is called a constructor. Now, if I were to describe the constructor further, I would say it is a two-parametric constructor. It is a two-parametric constructor, and this I would have age is equal to A, roll number is equal to R. So this is to initialize the state, and we will soon see how to use it. So then I have a method called display, which will display what is there in student, in that particular student. So cout. Now you will say, what is cout? Cout is your console. It's an output object. So cout is an output object which is by default the console output object. So that is why we call it cout. That means like what we use in C as printf. And I will just talk about what is the difference. In fact, it's pretty obvious here. What's the difference between printf and cout? I'll take this line on another sheet and show you the difference, then I'll come back. Okay. So I have said here in the display method cout, age, and I have said here after that space, and then I would have to say roll number, and I would then say NL. Sorry, NL. This is what I would write. Now, how is this better than writing a printf? If I have to write a printf which would display something similar, what I would have to do? I would have to say first %d, then I would have a space in between, and how would I indicate space? I would just maybe put space or whatever. So then I would say %d, okay, or I would give some gap, and I would have to then say roll number, sorry, first would come age, then come roll number. Okay. Now, what is the difference between this style and this style? If this is kind of equivalent to this. The problem is, here in this printf, I would have to give this format of age, and I would have to give this %d for the format of roll number. That means if I have to print age, I should know what kind of animal is age, and I have to indicate it here. Suppose age was a float for some reason, I would say %f. If roll number was a string, I would have to say %s. So in a language like C, which is a very precision language, I would have to be careful that what age is, what roll number is, the data type I should know, and only if I know the data type, I would use the appropriate format here. Without this, I won't print here. But if you look at this line, cout, age, space, roll number, age knew how to print itself. Roll number knew how to display itself. We didn't need to say somewhere that age has to be printed as a %d and roll number has to be printed as a %d again. Nobody had to say that. It became automatic, and that is the power of an object-oriented language, that age knows how to display itself, roll number knows how to display itself. Then what is cout? Is the console object. Printf by default goes to the console object. Here cout is that console object. And what is this called? This is called the output operator. Similarly, there is an input operator. Now, what would the input operator look like? Reverse side. That would be the input operator. This would be the output operator. So this is the output operator. So what I just look at this part. What does this do? Please focus your attention. There is something slightly deeper there. Age is outputted on the output object using the output operator. So if I have to print anything, I'll say cout X, and X will print itself. And there is also one more thing which is happening. The return of this operation, okay, let me highlight that. The return of this operation, that is when age gets outputted on cout, the result of this operation is also another cout. That is why I can now do outputting on this of this blank. If the return of this was some number, then how can I output onto a number? I have to output always on a output object, and the original output object is cout. So on cout, when you output age, the result of that operation is also cout, and that is the beauty of cout. So you can kind of concatenate. Here you see this output operator is acting on the cout, which is returned as a result of this operation, and on that we are outputting a blank. The result of this operation, is also a cout, on which I am outputting the roll number. The result of this roll number getting outputted on cout is another cout object, on which I am putting endl. Endl is our new line character. Just like you say in printf, you would have had here \n. That is the purpose served by endl. Endl means end of line. That is, after I have outputted age and I have outputted roll number with a space in between, I should output an end of line character, whatever be the end of line character. So end of line character will be put at the end, and the cursor will automatically go to the next line. So that having said, let's see whether we can go back. Yeah, we'll go back a bit, and let's talk about what happened here. So let's shrink this for a moment. And we have this student, and this is the display method. So in this case, our class student has how many methods? Many of you will say it has 2 methods. Maybe you are right. But normally we say it has one method which is a constructor and one method which is display. Normally constructor is called a special method, not counted in the series of methods, whereas this is called a method. Some people call this also as a method, that doesn't matter. Constructor is a special method, I am saying at the cost of repeating myself, is having the same name as the name of the class, can take parameters, and as we later understand, the constructor can be overloaded, meaning the constructor, there can be more than one constructor for a given class. So that is what we have to keep in mind. Now, we are going to, see, this is not a C++ course, so I am not going to go further than this for defining a class. Later, as your C++ part of the course also catches up, we will introduce ideas of inheritance in linked list, ideas of inheritance in sets, in other things. But right now, let us be comfortable with this. So let's move on and see how I can use student. Okay, how do I use student now? And then I will say how do I create a linked list of students. Let's go one by one. So now I hope all of you have been able to type class student. Agree? Everybody has class student? No, yes? Or do you want me to go back? This is what I want you to have in your practice question. Please type as you go on. Don't just sit there and lay eggs. You're not here for doing that. Class student. Does everybody have class student on their system? Yes, no? This is all you mean by class student. So how do I use a class student? So normally I would have a CPP file and I would have a class student at the top, which I would create here. Okay. And then, do I need a semicolon here? Okay. Here, do I need a semicolon? Okay. So I have a semicolon. Okay. Then I have a main. So I am going to start writing the main. So this is my main. Okay, so I hope you are, now I have a class student here. I need this class. So whatever we have created, and below that we have a nice main. Okay. So we have a main. Okay. Now we go forward. I am now writing the main. So whatever I am writing here. Okay. So we move forward. So let me change the color. So I am writing main here again. And let's see what I am going to do in the main first. So I am going to say student. I am going to create an object of class student. That means, I hope I'll be little concise in defining what is an object here. I'll give you the analogy which I normally give. Class is like a blueprint. An object is something which is actually going to take memory. Class doesn't take memory. Class is just a concept. It's an abstract concept. And object is what actually gets created in your program. The analogy which I often give is that I'm sure you live in apartments. Many of you live in apartments. So before somebody bought your apartment or you bought your apartment, you would have looked at the blueprint, or before your apartment was created, there would be a blueprint of your apartment, which was actually a blue piece of paper where they would show the structure of your apartment. This is the drawing room, this is the bedroom, this is the balcony, this is the kitchen, this is the puja room, this is so and so, which will be just a definition. The dimensions will be there, the overall layout and structure will be there. So class, if you want to have a concept in your mind, think of it as that blueprint. So before an apartment takes shape, somebody has to sit and create that blueprint. Maybe the artist or the architect has to define the blueprint. So what you have done so far is you have created a class, means you have defined the blueprint of the objects you are going to take. Then just like from that blueprint, n number of apartments are created, all following the same structure, same architecture. Like that, even in a programming language, we are going to create a whole set of objects belonging to a given class. So the class is going to be the template, and object is the thing which is going to take memory, which is going to get created from the template. So always, any project with classes, first start with creating this template or creating this class or the blueprint, and then the objects get created from that blueprint. So now we are going to create one object at a time. We are going to create just one object, and then we are going to work with it. And I am going to show you two ways of creating that object. One using a pointer notation and one without a pointer notation. So let's see both ways of creating that object. So now I am going to show you without pointer notation. So I am going to say student S. S is created as a student. You know the parameters the constructor takes? The parameter the constructor takes is two parameters. First is age, then is roll number. So age, let's say, is 18 years, and roll number is, let's say, 3, 4, 5. This is the roll number. So just this line will create an object. Not only will it create an object called S. What is the name of the object? S. What type of object is it? What is the class of this object? Student. And what does S contain? Its age is going to be 18 and its roll number is going to be 345. So imagine that a piece of memory is getting created. S is the name of that memory, and in that memory there are two fields, age, which is 18, and roll number, which is 345. So there is a roll number which is there and age it is there. So this is what S represents. This is one way of creating an object. So an object has taken birth on this line. The type of that object at the cost of repeating is student, and this has invoked the constructor, which has caused, automatically the constructor is invoked. I don't have to invoke. Remember, I had a constructor which takes two parameters, which is age and roll number. So the constructor has got invoked age and roll number. So that is how the constructor got called. And please remember, you should have marked that constructor as public. Otherwise, if you try to run this code, you will get an error. Okay, and then if I want to see how the student looks like, I will say S. dot the same S. Generally it's smaller case. So make this smaller case. So display. If I say S dot display, what will happen is on the screen something like this will appear. 18, 18, then space, and then 345. This is what should appear when you run this program. Okay. So I am going to again pause here and wait for you to just run this main program. Just run this part of the program. You can give it to the telescope and run it. Do we need any includes? We need any imports using namespace? Do we need it or not? You at the top of the program you can say using namespace std. Like this. Using namespace std. Or you can also say, I don't know because it's a long time since I worked with your compiler. Hash include stdio.h or hash include console.io.h. I don't know. What are the includes which are needed? IO stream. Okay. So you can say IO stream.h. Depends. Either. So hash include. Hash include IO stream.h. IO stream.h. This is stream. Now you will have to run this program and check please because I don't want you to miss it. The program that I want you to run is student S. This can be anything 18 not particular that everybody should be 18 years old. 18 and 345 whatever. It should, when I say display, it should display whatever you want in the student on the screen so that you are with me. Yeah, please ensure that it happens. Some of you may be allergic to typing and some of you may make genuine errors because this is the first time we are seeing the language. Just do a creation of the object here and just do a display. I'll wait. And output should be something like this. Above there should be IO stream. After that there should be class. Without the class you can't create student, no? This should be before. Display student. These are the two methods. After that, first have this class. After that you should have this. First the class student, then this. If you want me to show you class student again, this main. Should we proceed? You have it? Otherwise I'll show you the screen. Okay, some of you have not got the class completely and properly yet. So I'll just show you the class again. See, this is the class. If you get this right, only the next lines will come. Class student, int age, int roll number, this is the state, public colon. Actually, public colon can be in a line by itself. Then you write below that, after this. And then say public colon, student and display. This, which is like saying that these methods are public. They are available outside. Done? Not all, I think. Most of you are done. So let me move on a bit. I'll write the main again so that I'm writing the main again. So I'm creating a student one way. Student S 18, 345. This we already have done. S dot display. Now briefly, what is happening here? This is calling the constructor and an object is getting created in memory. This is the only point at which the object is getting created. This is the name of the class. This is the object. S is the object. And it is created with data members, two data members, whose values are 18 and 345 or whatever you are doing. Then look at this line. What is S? S is an object. Of which class? Student. So on this object, using the dot notation, I can invoke a method which belongs to that class. Remember, I cannot invoke the constructor because constructor is a special method. Constructor is getting invoked automatically here. So I will say here, comment constructor invoked automatically. I don't have to call the constructor. This line itself invokes that special method called as a constructor. Okay, so it is invoked. And I am saying, now look at this line. Pay attention to this line. What is happening here? S. On S, I am calling for a special behavior or a special method called display, whose logic I have written in the student class. When I created the student class, I wrote the logic for display. Okay. So S.display will say, on S, call the display method or show the display behavior. So what happens? In the body of the display, what I have done? I have that line Cout, output operator, age, output operator, space, output operator, roll number, and endl. After that, output operator endl. So I am doing that. So that will happen because I say on this S display, this S which contains age as 18 and roll number as 345, invoke a method called display, which will cause whatever is there in that object to be displayed on the screen using Cout. Cout is the output object. All small, Cout, okay, all small. Then, this is one way of creating an object, okay. Then, there is another way of creating an object, which is like this. Look at this way. Student, star, I am doing it 2 lines, star, SPTR. Now what am I doing in this line? I have not created any student yet, but I have created something called SPTR. What is SPTR? Because of this star, what is the kind of animal SPTR is? SPTR is a pointer. Pointer to what? A student object. So SPTR can point to a student object. Just like in your last course, see, you have said int star IPTR or whatever. If you had said int star IPTR or some PTR, what is the kind of IPTR? IPTR is also a pointer. SPTR is also a pointer. Where is the variation? The variation is IPTR can point to an integer. SPTR can point to a student object. SPTR is used to point to a student object. Right now, is it pointing anywhere? No, it is not pointing anywhere. Right now, is this pointing anywhere? No, this is also not pointing anywhere. So, in order to make an integer point, what would I have to do? I would have to say int I equal to 5. I would create an integer, and then I would say IPTR is equal to ampersand of I. Wouldn't I have to do this in C? I would have to say, this is your C story, right? So what do? I first create an integer pointer. This is how I create an integer pointer. This only creates a pointer. Then I say, this is a line by itself, int I equal to 5, and IPTR is equal to address of 5. Let's think about what is happening here. Okay. So first, IPTR is getting created here. I am just describing what is happening here. IPTR is getting created here. Is IPTR pointing anywhere? No. With just this line, IPTR is just getting created as a space in memory. IPTR also takes memory. So IPTR is getting created. This is IPTR. Is it pointing anywhere? No, it's not pointing anywhere. Then I am creating a memory called I. So I am creating a memory called I. And what is the value in that memory? 5. The value here is junk right now. At the end of this line, I have created an IPTR which points nowhere, which is junk, points to junk, let's say. And you have an I which is having 5 in its location. I is a location and 5 is the value in the location. Now, when I say IPTR is equal to address of I. Now this I is somewhere in memory. Let's say that address at which it is memory, I am writing in hexadecimal, is 0x200. This is a hexadecimal way of writing an address. So you can write it in decimal form also, but that's convention. So I have 0x200. This is the address of I. What is the value sitting there? 5. The value sitting there is 5. And I have now, what I have done? I have said IPTR is equal to address of I. What is the address of I? 0x200. So what will happen after I do this line? Here I will get a value 0x200. Now what is 0x200? It's an address. Address to where? To I. What is sitting in I? Integer. What is the value of that integer? 5. So this is all has happened in our regular C program. This is how our regular C program works. This is nothing to do with C++. It of course, whatever works in C, works in C++. So, I mean that is given because C++ is a plus version of C. It is only an addition to C, not a subtraction or a reduction, right? So, we have int star iptr, int I equal to 5, iptr is equal to ampersand of I. This is what I have. Are we all on the same page? Is this clear? So now, if I have to display this value, what would I have to do in C? I would have to say printf, correct? Then I would say %d, and I am going to print it using a pointer. So what I would have to say? Star of iptr. Star does what? It goes to that pointer. Now this star is different from this star. This star is only to declare iptr as an integer pointer. So this is a different utility. Whereas here, what am I doing? I am taking iptr and I am saying, I don't want iptr. Instead, what do I want? I want what iptr points to. That value I want. Don't give me iptr. What iptr points to. So go to iptr location, find out what is sitting there, go to that address, which is this, get the value sitting there and give it to me. That is what is happening. This is called pointer dereferencing. Dereferencing means going ulta. That is, from the pointer, I am going to the value pointed to by the pointer. And this is called referencing. In computer science, we refer to this as referencing and this as dereferencing. Dereferencing means take a pointer and dereference the pointer. Dereferencing the pointer means go to the value which the pointer is pointing to and get me that value. That value is getting displayed. The value is fetched and displayed. That is what happens in C. Okay. Now, they have taken the same analogy, which hopefully many of you are familiar in C, and mirrored it kind of in C++. So, since this screen has got a lot cluttered, and I don't want to rub this, I will go to the next page and continue from here. So I am going to continue from this line onwards. These two lines I am not going to put again. So I am going to say student star SPTR. So SPTR is a pointer. So there will be a location created called SPTR, which at this moment, at this line, is not pointing anywhere. It's junk at the moment. Just like when we said int star iptr, it was junk. Okay? So this is also junk. At the moment SPTR is junk. It is not pointing anywhere. It is just declared. SPTR is created as a location which should hold an address, but what it is holding at the moment is all junk. It is not pointing anywhere. Nothing meaningful. Okay. Now, what am I doing? I am saying now SPTR is equal to, now mark my notation, new student. I am creating a new student with the same data 18345. So now see the difference between this way of creating and the earlier way of creating. This is the way I am creating using a pointer. So now there is a location, separate location, in which a student is getting created and SPTR is here. Now because of this new student, a student is taking birth. Just like when we said student S18 and 345, there we didn't get a pointer to it. Now the student is getting created in a similar way, new student 1845. But what is the difference here now? There we got simply S. Now what we are getting, because of the new way of creation, this is actually getting created on a heap. I will not confuse you right now about a heap and a stack, but let's not worry about that. I am creating an object in a separate memory location. That object is called student. It also has age as 18, roll number as 345, or it could be something else. This student is getting created, and now what SPTR is containing? In a similar way, it is containing the address at which this location is. This is somewhere now, somewhere in memory. This is there. This is a continuous, think of it as a continuous block of memory. That block of memory, let's say, has an address 0x300 as an example. So 0x300 is what is there here. This is what is happening because of this line. So I am saying SPTR is equal to new student 18345. As usual, a student is taking birth with this data, and after the student has taken birth, SPTR is now pointing to that location. So I can say, I can show as if SPTR is leading to a student object which contains this data. But S and SPTR, please understand the difference. S is that object itself. So this is like S. And SPTR is an address of that object. You should understand S is the object and SPTR is the address of that object in that sense. So SPTR points to that object. So that's why SPTR will not contain, SPTR will contain the address of the object. Now, there what did we say? In order to call the display method, we use the dot notation. On S we said S dot display, correct? And then the display behavior got called on that student, and because of that you got 18 and 345 and you're out. Any guesses? What would I say here? I would use an arrow. Remember, dot is used for an object, arrow is used for a pointer on an object. If S was an object, which it was in the last instance when we created it, now SPTR is not an object. You can't say SPTR dot. No, that is not allowed. You have to say SPTR arrow. So you will have to say SPTR arrow, because SPTR is a pointer. The nature of the beast is different. S and SPTR, S is an actual object, SPTR is a pointer to that object, pointer of that object. So SPTR display. This is how you will call it. You with me? Or alternatively, okay, S is already an object, it's like an integer which was created. I could also say SPTR is equal to ampersand of S. That is address of S. Which is this S? What you just created. What you just created a few minutes back. That is your S. After that you can write student star SPTR. This is one way of creating a student, okay, using directly. Or you can say SPTR ampersand S. Okay, to just have variety, let's change this data to 20 and 700. Let's make this 20 and 700. And then now we say SPTR ampersand S. Now what SPTR is pointing to? Again address of S. S which you created earlier, that was an object. Now SPTR is pointing to the, or SPTR is holding the address of that object. This ampersand always gives you an address. So my way of writing ampersand, a lot of people find it funny, but that's the only way I've been taught myself to write. Okay? I can't write that very artistic ampersand. So SPTR ampersand of S, it's an address of S. And then what do? I now say SPTR, I can say now display. So what this, if you write this, this will print 20 and 700, having changed the data here. This will print 20 and 700. This will print, sorry, display 18 and 345. Okay, this is what this will print. Do I make some sense? So this is the two ways of creating objects. Okay, again at the cost of repeating, okay, this is like student star SPTR. SPTR is equal to new student 20700. That is, I am creating a student object with this data. Then I am saying SPTR display. This is calling the display on this object. And then I am saying SPTR is now going to point to S. So to give you a more pictorial view, let me give you a more pictorial view. So in my program, I have two objects. There is an S which I created earlier, which has 18 and 345. And then there is another object whose name I don't know. It's somewhere in memory, whose data is 25 and age is, roll number is 700. Initially, SPTR is pointing here and S is here. So I say S dot display, and here I say SPTR arrow display, and then here after this, after I have displayed here, I'll get 18 and 345. Then I say SPTR display. Now after I run this line, SPTR is equal to ampersand of S. After I run this line, what will happen? My SPTR now, which was pointing to this object, will get pointed to this object. And this will go. This. Now if I say SPTR arrow display, I will again get 18 and 345, because now after this line, SPTR is pointing to the same object, old object, and I will get this data. And now, anybody knows what is the problem with my code? I have a problem. Anybody wants to tell me what is the problem? It will work, but there is one problem. Anybody wants to answer? Just hold back. There is something wrong in my program. I will not say wrong, I will use the word improper. Something, I am showing it on the screen. Oh, you answer. Something fishy in my program. I don't know what is the right word to use. My program has a bug, let's call it, has a small one. It will produce the correct output. It will show whatever is, it will run properly and show output. But there is a small bug. Somebody is using very right words. Yes. Anybody can hear.
Without freeing the previous memory, we allocated the new thing again.
Excellent. That is the problem. See, what is happening now, if you notice, this piece of memory, there is nobody leading to it. This is called orphan memory. This will lead to a serious problem in computer science. We call it as a memory bleed or a memory leak. Memory bleed. This is bleeding because I can never reclaim this memory. This is there, nobody is pointing to it, and nobody is pointing to it. It's like something there which is orphaned. No connection to that memory from my program. That will lead to problems. We will soon discuss those problems and how to get out of those problems. But this is a problem I want you to appreciate at this point. We have a very, very classic bug in our problem. Now, why I want to bring out this is, when you move on to Java, if I do something similar like this in Java, I don't have to worry about this orphan memory. In Java, I don't have to worry about orphan memory. In Python, I don't have to worry about orphan memory. There will be something called a garbage collector, GC we call it, garbage collector. There will be a garbage collector in the program which will reclaim this orphan memory, and you will not be in any trouble. Whereas in C++ or C equivalent, you will have this problem that this is orphan memory and this memory is causing a bleed because I have nothing pointing to it. The SPTR, which was a pointer, now is pointing to a OS. So there is nothing pointing. This is a very bad situation. And this can lead to you losing your job at some stage. Okay? Because if you program without taking care of these situations, that means you are a kacha programmer, useless programmer, bad programmer. A lot of people will lose jobs because of this. I've lost jobs. Careless. Okay? Because what happens in this is, this error is difficult to spot, and if this habit gets cultivated, there will be a lot of bugs in your program which at later date will be very difficult to debug. So this is one of the reasons why you get fired for incompetence. It's one of the levels of incompetence. Of course, you can always use Java or Python and say, oh, I can never have this problem. Yeah, that's true. But then you will miss the power of C++. Someday we'll have a discussion why you would still want to use C++. Why even to this day, even with these problems, why people still prefer C++. There are a lot of community of people who still swear by C++. And rightly so. Because there are certain category of applications which can only be done in C++ and nothing else. Okay, so you have to be aware of this problem, and we know how to handle this problem. There is a way we will do, we'll discuss that. Okay, now what I want you to do is, since it's the first day and you are not yet very comfortable, I would like you to do this. Do this means you have the first 2 lines, or 3 lines. You are creating a student, you are creating a display, you are seeing that. Now just continue with that and I will go back a bit and show you. Probably you should do this. Yeah. So after you have created that student that way, create a student this way and write these lines of code and test it on your own whether they are working. Student star SPTR, SPTR is equal to new student, SPTR display, and then make SPTR point to the earlier student object by giving address of S, and then say SPTR display. This time you will get the old student object. Now in order to distinguish, create a new student object with 20 and 700 so that you know which it is pointing to. Okay? Please finish this, I will wait for it and then we will move on. Take SPTR point to that earlier object, also call again display, check whether you are getting the old data. You should get the old data. Don't worry about free or anything right now, freeing memory and all, we'll worry about it later. Just listen and we'll stop after this. Yeah. Now, see, this is a data structures course. Now, I'm going to talk about the difference between an array of students and a linked list of students. Very briefly, no programming, conceptually. So, I have now class student, correct? I have student. Just like you may have int. So, how do I create an array of integers? I say int ARR 10. Am I right? Oh yes. This is how you create an array of integers. No big. And what happens because of this? A contiguous allocation of memory takes place. So if I visualize ARR in memory, this will be like ARR. ARR will refer to this. And I will have how many slots? I will have 10 slots, 0 to 9. These are my slots. These are my slots in my memory. 0 to 9, right? And then I can say ARR of 0 is equal to 5 and so on and so forth. This is how I would create an array of integers. Would you agree? Nothing to it now. Just creating an array of integers. Array you know already. You have studied array. Okay? You can go from the next element to this element and forth. Suppose you were asked to create an array of students. What would you do? You would say SARR or whatever, name doesn't matter, of 10. Correct? You would create this way. You would get an array of students. In this case, each element SARR. In this case, each element, here was an integer. Here would be a student object. Here it would be just an integer, just a value 5. Here it would be a student object consisting of age and roll number. So it would be an array of student objects. So if I were to say, let's say 2700 and so on, it will also be indexed from 0 to 9. Suppose I were to ask you, what is the roll number of the second student? I would say SARR of 1. That would refer to the student. SARR of 1 dot roll number. Fair enough? I'll get the roll number. This is how an array looks like. A contiguous area of memory. What is the disadvantage of that? Disadvantage of that is, on what basis am I deciding 10? On some basis. But is that basis always correct? Maybe, may not be. Why? Because I may allocate an array of 10 students and the class may have only 2 students. Then what would be the problem? The problem would be I would be wasting unnecessary memory for 8 students. which is futile. On the contrary, I may create an array of 10 students, and what may happen is that I may need 15 students. What will I do? I can't fit them in an array. Array is always of a fixed size. Whether you underutilize it or overuse it, you cannot expand it to 15. You can by doing some more programming, but directly an array cannot be extended to 15. And if you are using only 2, it cannot be shrunk to 2. It has to remain as 10. So arrays suffer from a basic problem that because they are of fixed size, they are often either underutilized or often they are also inadequate. They are not capable of storing the entire data. So people generally say you can use an array, but when you know for a certain that what is the total amount of memory that you might require, at least a rough idea of how many students. Some part of the array may be unutilized, that's okay, but at least you should have a reasonable upper bound on the number of students you can have. Then only you can create an array. Otherwise, how will you create an array? Because array has to be fixed size. You cannot create. But what if my nature of my problem is I don't know how many students are going to be there? Then what I would use? Those are the occasions where you drift or shift from an array-based data structure to a linked list-based data structure. Okay. In a linked list, there is no upper limit, there is no lower limit. As new students come, you can keep adding to them. Okay. So an equivalent data structure for linked list would be, I have this first student. Why did I create this student? Because there was one student. Then I realized that I need one more student. So in every student, there is a pointer to the next student, a link to the next student. So I have here. I needed one more student. I added one more. So I am having 3 students because the current problem needs only 3 students. I am not allocating any excess memory. I am allocating memory only for 3 students, as much as required. If I do it with this array, I can't do it because I have to allocate some fixed size, which I have to guess in the beginning. And I always, as I said, may underutilize it. I may create an array of 100 students and I will use only 3. So I am unnecessarily wasting memory. Correct? So I wouldn't want to do that. So this gives me a direct saving of memory. I create as many students in the list as I actually need them. Nothing more, nothing less. This is what first advantage. Another thing. So suppose, now let's go back to the array and see a problem with the array. So suppose this is my data or this is my data. Now I want to insert a student between this and this. Let's say I am in some chronological age. So I have a student whose age is 19 and for some reason I want him here. I want to put him in between. Sorry. I want to put him in between. Between 18 and 20. I want to put him. Can I do that? I can, but for doing that I have to push all these guys below. So whoever is there below, I have to do a memory copy. I have to keep them going down, assuming there is enough space. Assuming that there is space, still I have this job of pushing the remaining members down and accommodating this guy in. That is going to cost me time, that is going to cost my performance, and I don't want that. I don't like that because just because I am inserting an employee at a particular point, I am suffering. I have to push everyone down. Now, if you will visualize a linked list, okay, let me start with a fresh page. So, let me draw an array. I have problems inserting, I have problems sizing, whereas linked list, no such problems. So, if I have to insert between this guy and this guy, what I would do in a linked list? I don't have to push anyone down. What I have to do? A little bit of pointer manipulation. I have to get this guy, create this guy, new student with age 19. Then what I have to do? This guy's, the first guy's next pointer has to point here instead of pointing here. And this guy's next pointer has to point here. and I have to cut this link. Did I have to push anybody down? No. Did I have to do any memory copying? No. I simply had to create a new student object, create a link from the previous student to this student, and from this student to the earlier next student. And by doing that, I have successfully adapted my linked list to this. So we have got ourselves two advantages of a linked list. Do you agree? First advantage is, I'm not restricted by a fixed size. Second advantage is, I can insert an employee wherever I want by just manipulating the pointers. If I am careful in manipulating my pointers without pushing anybody anywhere, I just bring another guy into the chain and link it up successfully. Same problem with deleting. Now here, let's say I have an array and I want to get this all filled up, let's say. And I have to get rid of this element. I have to remove this element. To keep the array contiguous, I have to push these guys up. Just like I was inserting, I have to push these guys down. Now I am deleting, I am getting rid of a particular employee or a particular student. I have to push all these guys up by one step. Again a painful process, again a very slow process. I don't want to waste my memory or time pushing people up when people get deleted. Here, if this guy or somebody else, let's say this guy, gets deleted, what do I have to do? In order to do a deletion, I have to do something very simple. What I have to do? This pointer, which it was pointing here, I cut this and point it here. That's it. This guy goes automatically out of the chain. He's no longer in the linked list. So, I don't have to push anybody up, anybody down. I simply manipulate my pointer a little bit and I have pushed this guy out of the list. Now the list is like this. This guy is no longer part of the list, no longer member of the list, because it is maintained through links. So we have now another advantage. Easy to insert, easy to remove, easy to grow on demand, and easy to shrink on demand. What is the corollary of that? Arrays, difficult to predict how much size it is, so underutilization is common. Inserting means pushing people down, takes time. Deleting means pushing people up, takes time. Much easier to do when you have pointer manipulation, like what I have shown you there. But I should not tell you, that way you will ask me, if this was the problem, why did we teach arrays at all? Okay. If linked list were so good and linked list was the default data structure, why did you have to talk about arrays? No. Arrays obviously have their advantage. When you are talking about arrays, there is one very significant advantage. That is, when you move from this location to this location, we just have to increment the index. So, if I have to move from ARR3 to ARR4, I just have to change the index. Whereas, in a linked list, if I have to move from here to here, I have to follow this link. Not this, following this link means going to memory, determining the pointer, and then going here. Simply by increasing the index, I cannot go from one location to the next. In case of pointers, I have to go to the memory, find out where that other guy is, and then repeat that other guy. That means I have to follow the pointer. Following a pointer slows down the performance. I hope you are getting what I am saying. Because there is a pointer location, I have to go dereference that address. Remember we talked about dereferencing. What will this guy hold? This guy will hold the address of this, not the index. Here I have to go find out the address, dereference that address to come here. Again go here, dereference that address and come here. Okay? So I have this significant disadvantage. We are moving from one element to another element to another element. In case of array is very trivial, very fast, because I just have to increment the index. Index is this value. Whereas here, if I move from here to here to here, I have to follow this pointer. This pointer is going to be damn slow. And moving from one to the next to the next. It's easy to insert, easy to delete, I just have to manipulate the pointer. There it is easy. But performance is always slower. Operation is easy, but performance is slow. So, when you are going through the array up and down, just moving, no insertion, no deletion, just moving up and down, arrays will be linked list hollow. Okay, one. Second significant advantage of array. What is the second significant advantage? In a linked list, suppose I have to reach, I want this element, I don't want these, I don't want this. I have to perforce go from the head, because I will only store the head. So, if we want this guy, you cannot store pointers to each. Linked list may be 1000 nodes long. So, you have to always start from the head and go all the way. That means you have to go through this node, then reach this node. So, if you want 800 node in a 1000 node linked list, what do you have to do? You have to traverse the first 79 nodes. Otherwise, you will not know where the 800 pointer is. In an array, what do you have to do? If you want the 800 element, you just say ARR 799. That's it. You don't have to go through each of these guys, because the 800 pointer is only with the 799 node. And to reach the 799 node, you have to go to the 798 node, because that guy only will have the address of the 798 node, 99 node. So you have to perforce go through the entire linked list to reach the 800 element. Here, nothing. You just say ARR 799 and you are at the 800 element. So this is called random access. When you are okay with sequential access, that is always you need this, all you need. You don't just need the intermediate value. Then linked list is okay. But if you are going to do random access means you want 800 element, then you want 400 element, then you want 1000 element, then you want 700 element. Here you will be lost, because once you are at 800 element, you can't come back to the 400 element. Again you have to start from the beginning and go to the 400. So the amount of looping and traversing that you have to do in a linked list is enormous. So moral of the story is what? Arrays are generally fast as long as you know the size of the array, as long as you are not going to do too many inserts, as long as you are not going to do too many deletes. Array is a good data structure. When is a linked list a better data structure? When you don't know a priori what is the size of your data structure going to be, how many students are going to be. You don't know in the beginning. They may vary from problem to problem. So you don't know. Then linked list is better. Linked list is also good when you don't have, when you have a lot of insert operations happening, insert at various points, and lot of delete operations happening, delete at various in-between points. If that is the kind of problem you are having, the kind of data you are having, you should use a linked list. If you are not having that kind of problem, if you know fixed size, if you know there are not going to be insertions in between or deletions in between, and there are going to be a lot of random accesses, array is a better data structure. So always, as a computer science engineer, one of the important tasks for us, and that's why we have this course in the first place, is for a given problem, how do you choose what is the right data structure you must employ? And that is a very serious problem, because it's like saying, if I use a wrong data structure, your programming may be okay, but because the choice of your data structure is wrong, you may end up being a bad program. The program being not as expected as you want it to be. So writing code is one part, but equally important in writing code is the choice of the data structure that you make. And you have to be extremely careful. Most of the time people don't think too much. But the idea is, the question you should ask before you create an array of students or a linked list of students, how do you expect this problem to use these students? Are there going to be in-between insertions? Are there going to be a defined number of students or a reasonable idea of the number of students? All these questions you must ask or you must determine, and then you must justify it is because of this that I use the data structure. It's not just because you felt one morning that today is an array day and tomorrow is going to be a linked list day. It is not made like that. It is deliberated, discussed with you, within yourself, argued, and then you make a choice that I should use this or use something else. And nowadays, in many of the other languages that we learn, like in Python for example, the list itself is a data structure. They don't call it an array. So internally, they have all kinds of operations implemented. So people are moved one step higher, where they are using list, and that is what we'll do right after the break. We'll talk about lists in Python. These are, now you'll ask, is it a list or is it an array? The answer would be, it is a list, but behaves like an array. So it has the programming simplicity of an array and the internal complexity of a list. Do you understand what I mean by that? That means, to you, it appears as an array, but internally, they have built it as a list. And they have built it so well that all the performance issues are taken care of. So, you start with a list in Python, you can insert at any point, delete at any point, no problem. Because they have the perception of a list, but they have the perception of an array, but the implementation of a list. And that is very important to understand. That is what we'll do. So we'll stop here.